Thank you so much, Ungayo. Appreciate the introduction, but as anybody knows that works in politics, it takes so many people to change the law, and as we are progressing state by state, now nation by nation, it takes a team of people, it takes educating people, it takes bringing people who opposed us into our side, letting them see the light, whether it's because of political reasons, financial reasons, moral reasons. And as people in California have found, as we definitely know in Oregon, you can have a great law, great program, produce great cannabis, but there are so many issues, taxes, banking, exports potentially, that require federal action. And that's what this panel is about. Cannabis and the Feds. We are really reaching a tipping point where we can see bipartisan efforts to end prohibition at the federal level. And these are folks here joining me on the stage that are helping make that happen. I will kick it off down the line for them to introduce themselves. But first, I do want to give a little introduction to Neil Levine, next to me with the Cannabis Trade Federation. Neil is a longtime activist, bringing activism in the industry together. He worked for the Marijuana Policy Project, helping fund my first decriminalization effort I worked on in a little college town called Columbia, Missouri, all the way back in 2003. And so the man has been putting in the work to move us state by state and now at the federal level. So Neil, tell us a little bit about yourself and kick it on down the line to our esteemed panel.
Thank you, Anthony. Everybody hear that? Good morning. Thanks for coming out. As Anthony said, my name's Neil Levine. I am the CEO of the Cannabis Trade Federation. We're kind of a startup. We've only been around for about 7 months, but we have some of the largest players and a diversity of businesses, both through geographic location and by business type throughout the country, who are coming together to pull together an aligned federation of organizations to really give us the representation that we need in DC and to give us to end prohibition. Our number one focus in this Congress, in the 116th Congress, is the States Act. And the States Act, basically what it says is if you are not in violation of state law, you're not in violation of federal law. The real world impact of what the States Act would do, it ends 280E, penalty taxation. The States Act would open up real commercial banking services. And the States Act would permanently end the threat of the Department of Justice kicking in our doors for the crime of running a state legal and compliant business. So, and we think that we have a real opportunity to pass that into law this Congress. The president has said he would sign it if it reaches his desk. We have bipartisan sponsors on both sides. Senator Cory Gardner is the lead sponsor in the Senate with Elizabeth Warren. Earl Blumenauer is the lead sponsor in the House with Representative David Joyce. And we are building from there. So very happy to be here. Thank you very much. And with that, I will kick it down to our esteemed panel. So look, as Anthony said, I've been doing this for 16, 17 years now. And what's really, really exciting is we've all been talking about when is it going to end? When is the federal-state conflict going to end? Well, here are some folks that are actively working on it, and I believe that these are the folks that are actually going to have it end this year. So with that, Melissa.
Great. Thank you, Neil. Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Melissa Kuipers-Blake. I'm a partner with Brownstein Hyatt and Farber-Schreck. I've been lobbying for 20-plus years. Started at the state level in Tallahassee in Florida in 1996, and have grown that practice into state lobbying throughout the country and federal lobbying in Washington, D.C. I couldn't be prouder to represent the Cannabis Trade Federation and be working on this incredible legislation with Neil and his team. And Neil's right, we have a real opportunity in this Congress between the bipartisan approach, the states' rights approach, how things are going to get addressed. I think we'll talk a little bit about substance more here in a second, but with that, I'll turn it over to my colleagues on the stage to introduce themselves.
Thanks, Melissa. My name is Andrew Shore. I've spent about 15 years on Capitol Hill, ending my career as the Chief of Staff at the House Republican Conference. Spend a lot of my time working on issues that I frankly believe Republicans should embrace, such as cannabis and the free market that you all have brought into this industry. I run a boutique law lobbying firm, and we are really, really excited to work with the Cannabis Trade Federation to pass the STATES Act and help all of you run legal compliant businesses in the light of day. That's exactly how it should work. That's not a Republican principle, not a Democrat principle, it's an American principle.
Thank you so much. My name is Nadeem Al-Shami. I've actually been working on these issues for quite a long time because for the past 10.5 years until I retired from Congress, I was Nancy Pelosi's communications director and chief of staff. I left Congress about 1.5 years ago, and this is a very important issue. We feel that there's an opportunity that is growing this year. This is the time. It took a lot of education, but now we feel that the chance is before us, and look forward to discussing this some more. So,
If you guys could grab a couple of those mics so we can just have kind of one person without and share them around. Before we get into the hard question, let's start. I know stuff. Let's start with optimistic reasons. And Neil, you can take this, or somebody else can take it off if you want. What are kind of the factors that you see both in DC and across the country? Like, why do you feel like this could be the year? Why are we at a tipping point at this time at Congress?
Prohibition's untenable. We have 33 states plus the District of Columbia that has opted out of prohibition in some form. We have 10 states plus the district that have opted out entirely. The Canadian markets are up and roaring. Mexico's about to set up their own markets. We see South America, European countries, now Asia and the Middle East, all starting to move towards the end of prohibition. We are seeding what should be an American industry for no other reason except for bad policy that has no basis in science. We are an industry that has hundreds of thousands of employees today working directly for the industry or supplying the industry. We are here fighting for hundreds of thousands of people's mortgages, hundreds of thousands of families' health insurance, and it is untenable. The idea that you could go to federal prison for doing your job that you are legally allowed to do under state law is one of the most un-American things that I could possibly think of. And the states have spoken, the people have spoken, the polling is through the roof. We are now supermajority for legalization nationwide. And then when you ask, well, regardless of how you feel about cannabis, if a state passes a law, should the federal government come in and interfere? 75% of Americans say no. So the idea of having the federal government step out and allowing the states to continue to do this polls 10% higher than ending prohibition, and ending prohibition polls at a supermajority. So it has become completely untenable. It makes no sense, and it's time for this to end. And the combination of the polling, of the states moving, of outside pressures is what has brought us to this place where we have to do it. We have to do it now. And we've done a lot of work on the states. The states are going to continue to open up markets. Congress must act. It is time for Congress to act. And
I imagine it has to do with a lot of the factors that Neil mentioned, but as you speak to people in Washington, D.C., are you hearing different things from them? Do you have like any stories? You may not be able to publicly provide their name, but can you share some stories about how things are changing?
Generically, we can share stories. I mean, to follow on what Neil's saying, the reason that you're seeing a lot more Republicans get engaged in this issue is because of the upward pressure from their state legislatures. When you've got states like Georgia, Arkansas, Oklahoma, any right-leaning, center-right-leaning states, and the legislatures are calling those members, who many of them served with, before they went to Congress, they were in the state house or the state senate, and they say, look, we've passed this bill. And it can be just CBD, it can be medical, whatever. And they call their member of Congress, or they see them back in the state capitol, and they say, look, we've done the work. You say you're for states' rights. You went to Washington, you said you would support a states' rights agenda. Well, here is your chance to support a states' rights agenda. Embrace what we've done. Allow us to be the incubators of this industry that we said we were. And I think it's very simple. That message is getting through loud and clear, and we're hearing that time and time again, that members, they want to be consistent in their views, and the people have not just only spoken, but they've acted.
And I'll add in here too. So my primary responsibility on behalf of the States Act is the Senate Republican Caucus, which you can imagine is an uphill climb in a lot of conversations on this issue, and really where kind of the negotiation and the real pressure is going to be. And Andrew's absolutely right. The first question is, what has my state done and what have my citizens decided? And the good news is, to Neil's point, a lot of the answers on that are yes. Our legislature's either passed it, our ballot measures are potentially going to be on the ballot, or in fact it has passed. We've had opportunities, for example, to meet with brand new members of the U.S. Senate whose states just passed, like Utah and Missouri. And those are really game-changing conversations because we go in with a little bit of an upper hand and the opportunity to say, look, not only did it passed by 10 points, or it passed by 7 points, and that's a big deal. And these members, many of whom got elected by a really narrow margin, want to really listen to what their state wants. So it's been a really interesting dynamic to be able to talk to them about what's happening back home. And yes, those are really the things that we use as our leverage points in these conversations. There's a lot of questions about after States Act, what's next? And our response is, look, states is the first step. We've got to get something done in federal law in order to open up answers to all of these other questions about how the industry would run in a long-term way. But really, that's the key, right? We want the industry to operate in a long-term, sustainable, regulated fashion, and States Act is the first step to that.
Are any of you from what you would consider a purple or red state? Is there anyone here from the Midwest? The best thing you can do when you go home is to reach out both to your member of Congress, but also to your state legislator. And if you've done something in the state, reinforce that idea. Go meet with them and say, hey, will you call our congressman? And they'll do it. They will do it.
I want to jump in real quick to piggyback on something Melissa said. Hey, Chris. What we're hearing from the left is very different from what we're hearing from the right. So we're engaged in these conversations on the right, and we have reframed this to talk in terms of federalism. Because if you're a true constitutionalist and a federalist and a conservative, it's really hard to argue that we are not the personification of federalism with 33 states plus a district that have opted out with different regulations and different laws and no product that can leave a state boundary. That being said, what we're hearing from the left is also incredibly encouraging. And what we're hearing is that they want a solution that includes restorative justice and social equity. And the fact that we now have, because let's be honest with each other, right? And I'm a nonpartisan. My first campaign that I ever did 20 years ago was Jesse Ventura for governor. It's true. And so I'm an honest nonpartisan, registered nonpartisan. And the Democrats haven't done anything for us in large part, just like the Republicans haven't done anything for us in large part. The only thing that the Congress has done to date is pass an appropriations rider that puts a restriction on spending DEA resources on going after medical marijuana licenses in the states, which has been incredibly helpful. But now that we have leadership in one of the houses of the U.S. Congress saying that prohibition needs to end with full expungements and full legalization on the federal level, how amazing is that? How amazing that we've gotten to this place. So as Melissa was saying, I don't think there's an appetite from the intel that we're hearing, we don't think there's an appetite in the Senate and with the administration for full decrim on the federal level yet. But there is an appetite for deferring to the states because while there's a lot of disagreement on what comes next, there's also growing amount of agreement that the conflict between federal and state law needs to end. And right. The first law that I quarterbacked personally passed into law was Vermont in 2004. Vermont in 2004, medical marijuana was 3 plants, 1 mature, 3 qualifying conditions, no industry. Fast forward a little over a decade later, Vermont becomes the first state legislature to end prohibition. You don't always get the law that you want the first time out. What we need to do is we need to pass the fundamental, game-changing piece of legislation that permanently changes the equation and the question on the federal level from should we do this to how should we do this.
You know,
and,
right-
when we get into how should we do this, CTF, we're going to be side by side. Where we think this ends is the end of full prohibition and full expungements. But we think the States Act can pass into law this Congress.
You know, let me talk briefly about how Democrats view this, especially in the House. This is an issue that they've been talking about for years. However, they're going to be holding hearings this Congress on various pieces of legislation, whether it's the finance issue, whether it's 280E, whether it's HR 420. However, what is the art of the possible? And that's how we should view this with the States Act. Can the States Act pass the House? Yes, but it's going to require some support from the ground up, from you, but also from members from the Republican side and from members who are going to say, look, this is what we can do because we know that this States Act could also pass the Senate. Look, I view this in 3 parts, right? First part is educate. Just like you said, call your member of Congress. Let them know. Go see him if you can here in the district, or go see him in Washington. So you have to educate. The second is you get a little tough, right? Advocate. We want this to be done this Congress. And the third is demand. So educate, advocate, demand. I'm sure all of you could do this. It's not that hard. Heck, we're doing it. But it's going to require the voters to really say, this has to get done.
The other linchpin of our strategy is bipartisanship. It is critical that this industry launch itself in Washington as bipartisan. You see time and time again that industries that have thrown in with one party or the other, it's a very short-sighted strategy, right? This, regardless of our personal views, you create jobs, as Neil likes to say, millions of mortgages, health insurance, jobs, and so maintaining that level of bipartisanship as we move forward on the States Act will really set the stage for you all for a long and prosperous future.
Soon to be millions of mortgages. Very soon.
Yeah, and Nadine, with your experience, working with Speaker Pelosi, I mean, it seems to me, kind of alluding to what Neil said about neither party has done enough for the cause, that the Democrats have talked the better game, and talk about the appropriations bill. They've had more voters vote for it, but they haven't been in the majority. Now they're in the House majority. And to me, for a lot of progressives, I feel like it's put up or shut up time, and that the Democrats will pay a price at the ballot box if they don't pass good cannabis legislation. Do you think Speaker Pelosi, the Democrats in charge, kind of feel that, or is it still on to the industry and the cannabis community to make that known?
No, if you think that you've done enough, you haven't done enough, all right? So how many of you here have actually called your member of Congress? And I'm not talking to... All right, here's something you should do, all right? Call your member of Congress. If your member of Congress is supportive, you call them up and say, thank you. We're behind you. So do your part also. And in terms of Democrats, yes, Democrats want to get something done. There is a hearing in the Financial Services Committee next week, in one of the subcommittees. That is a start. I mean, heck, this is February. They've only been in power for 2 months. We had a month-long government shutdown, and one of the early hearings is on this issue. So feel good about where we are. Continue to push, but also focus on what is the art of the possible. If we could get everything we wanted, that'd be great. But this is a bipartisan effort. You have a Democratic House and a Republican Senate and a Republican president. So what is the magic? If you look at it as a triangle, what is in the middle, right? What can everyone agree on? We believe it's the States Act, but they need to know that. And every, the House and the Senate and the President, they all need to get there together. It may take a little longer this Congress, but we feel strongly with your help and what we're doing we'll be able to get there.
Melissa, I'll kick this off to you. It seems you have really the most important job with the Senate caucus. No pressure. It all depends on you. With Mitch McConnell, with his position, is it really all about swaying Mitch McConnell, or is it things that like Cory Gardner, Republicans from other states that have gone legal, either adult use or medical? Is it convincing them to put pressure on Mitch McConnell? Can you give us a little peek behind the curtain about how we go about getting a bill introduced in the Senate?
You bet. It's a great question. It's the question right now. So to Nadim's point, we expect the House to hold hearings on these issues, pass a lot of legislation, whether it's on banking individually, some social justice reform, and then of course the States Act, all of which will pass. You'll see headlines, they'll go to the Senate, right? And then it'll be crickets in the Senate. There's not going to be an immediate response from the Republican-led Senate about what to do on these bills. But we do understand and believe very wholeheartedly that the only possible vehicle is the States Act. So how do we get the States Act done? Well, a couple things. We've got the White House support. The President's team has already said, if you get States Act on my desk, I will sign it. Great. There's some leverage with Senate Republicans who want to get elected in 2020, for example. Next analysis is, okay, where does the bill get, heard? Is it in committee? Is it on another bill? Those are things that we're still working out about how the process would actually get done. But I can tell you that we are aggressively pursuing Mitch McConnell and his team and making the case for why this is the right solution. If Kentucky wants to pass medical or recreational marijuana, they can, but the federal government isn't going to tell them that they should. That is an argument that plays really well in southern conservative states, for example. On the flip side, should Kentucky pass a measure, it would go a long way to help in our conversations with Mitch McConnell. So just saying, if anybody wants to pass something in Kentucky, that would be helpful. But we are very much negotiating with that leadership office. Mitch McConnell's actually started calling me the marijuana preacher because we are in there so much pushing and trying to find a way to get this done. So like I said, you'll see a lot of bills come out of the House. You'll see some dialogue about the Senate and where those bills are going to end up. And if this becomes an issue for enough Senate Republicans where they go to their leaders, McConnell and others in the leadership team, and say, this is something that I need, all of which is being led and orchestrated by Cory Gardner from Colorado, then you'll see some movement. And that's really our strategy. And we're getting the meetings. We just did Capitol Hill visits this week. We had 31 meetings with the Cannabis Trade Federation Board and our lobby team on Capitol Hill with members that truly matter in this analysis, Senate Republicans that are what we consider to be the most likely that we'll get, all of whom said, keep talking to me, tell me what else you find out, and let's find a way to get this done. So we're not quite there yet, but we're getting there. And you can always tell momentum in politics, and we feel the momentum, and it's something we should all be really excited about.
All right, I got a couple more questions where we kick it off to the audience for their questions. I think wisely, you folks are concentrating on the States Act because that is what's possible. Neil, this may be best for you, but say the States Act passes, and I think we've seen the Democratic candidates all come around to legalization, either evolve from former positions. You even see Joe Biden, who was an architect of very bad criminal justice legislation, start to kind of give some talk about why he was wrong doing that in case he jumps in the ring for president. And it seems to me Donald Trump, he is really in the 90s he's quoted as saying he supported legalization of all drugs. It seems like he's very much a states' rights kind of libertarian on the issue, really. So States Act's passed, then what's next?
Well, States Act's passed, what's next? First off, if 280E goes away at any point in 2019, it doesn't apply for all of 2019. So what's next is if you're prepaying your taxes to the federal government, you're getting a check back. So how and folks know this, right? When your CPA fills out your tax return, they have to sign an affidavit that says everything in here is true. Therefore, they have to take 280E into account. States Act passes. We've taken the illegality out of this. You don't have to take 280E into account in your tax return. They can sign that affidavit without taking it into account. The IRS would have to catch you on audit, and it wouldn't apply because any state license in legal business would be removed from the CSA. If you are licensed under, so that's the immediate impact. We're going to see credit unions and community banks start offering FDIC-insured bank accounts and real commercial banking services. Wouldn't it be nice if you're running a good business with a good bottom line and a healthy EBITDA that you can get a business loan? So those are the immediate impacts. And certainly don't have to worry, like I said, no one's going to come from DOJ and come kick in your doors and seize all your assets for the crime of running a state legal business. As far as the next Congress goes, what we would like to see come next is full federal legalization with expungements, and that's what we'll work towards. As far as the whole suite of bills that Representative Blumenauer has put out, we agree, outside of a 25% excise tax, we probably agree with just about every one of them. And so, this, as Nadeem said, States Act is the art of the possible. The U.S. Congress has never given us anything outside of an appropriations rider. This would be seismic, permanent, monumental change, and we're going for it. We've assembled a team to go for it, where we need everyone's support that we can get. But what comes next is we engage in a dialogue of, okay, now that we've done it, what does it look like? What does the end of prohibition look like on the federal level? And there's a lot of varying opinions on that, and there's a lot of stakeholders. So we would convene those stakeholders, and we'd have a real discussion about that. And again, but where we think this needs to end is if you have a criminal conviction for something that's no longer illegal, that should be expunged. And there should be full federal end of prohibition as soon as possible.
With the States Act, if it passes, or I guess go with when it passes, I think something that would entice California cultivators. I know it would definitely entice cultivators in Oregon. What about exports? Would the States Act allow states to interact to agree to compacts? If Nevada or Arizona wants to import California cannabis, would the States Act would that allow that, or would we need new legislation?
States Act very simply says if you're not in violation of state law, you're not in violation of federal law, so state law would reign. Currently, every state law says product can't leave a state boundary. So it would defer to state law.
All right, then last question for me before we kick it back to the audience is, how do people support your work? What do they need to do? CannabisTradeFederation.com. You can donate. You can sign up for our list. You can volunteer. You can call your members of Congress. All right. And Gaio, got a question from the audience for us?
Oh, yes, indeed. Let's hear it once again for Anthony and all of our panelists. And we remind you, question and answer period. Please try to keep your questions brief. We don't need the whole history of cannabis before you ask your question. I know how some of you are when you've had hash for breakfast. All right, here we go.
Mike Gredzian from Oregon. Appreciate the efforts on legislative area with the States Act. What about the other side of the coin? What kind of news do you have on just a completely descheduling front?
As we said, the House is probably going to pass more than the Senate would be willing to take up. Our intel is that there's absolutely no appetite in the U.S. Senate, in this Congress, to deal with full decrim.
My question is with regards to lobbying, particularly the Republicans. Is John Boehner engaged in any lobbying efforts with Mitch McConnell?
Or are they just drinking buddies?
Boehner's not, Acreage and Boehner's not part of our coalition, so they are, I don't know to what level we're engaged with Speaker McConnell, and we're in regular talks, and as Melissa said, we're very optimistic that we're making some progress.
My question is, in states, because Utah just recently passed a bill, they have passed a bill and they have since gone through recently and are gutting it with helps to certain outside organizations, maybe churches involved there. So what is the best way to approach situations like that? I know lobbying senators and all that kind of stuff is probably our best bet, but the Church of Jesus Christ has a really large pull in the state of Utah. So,
unfortunately, what what happened there was that the campaign team cut a deal before the election that they would go to this, whether the initiative passed or not, they would go to the legislature together to pass a law that would be acceptable to the governor and the establishment in Utah. So then it passed, but the campaign had already cut that deal. Obviously I wasn't part of that, but the campaign already cut that deal. So they're adhering to the deal that they cut to bring medical marijuana regardless of the result of the election. So that's what's happening there.
Are there more questions? Oh, all the way
I
over
just
there.
want to chime in on that one, because
Yeah,
that
do
is
you
something
think-
that's something that you notice really in every state that passes a law, is that it gets changed, or most states, it gets changed. And so I would encourage folks to make the people that go against the will of voters, make sure they pay a political price, and let them know that as people that supported it, as patients, as an industry, that you want the will of the voters supported, and then really put political pressure on maybe some key swing votes. And really, in a place where you're up against other interests, that can be tough to do. But really, that's the only thing you can do. Or you have to try to correct it with future legislation to get back to what the will of the voters want.
That's a good point. We still need activists, everybody. Lobbyists are cool too, but activists, man, be in the halls, talk to your people, get everybody fired up.
This might be premature, but I was just wondering if in your conversations with lawmakers, if imports have been addressed on the federal level. Obviously, I come from a long history of flower growing in Southern California, and South America has crippled our industry.
Well, so right now, outside of so there are importing some Canadian cannabis for research, which is actually incredibly annoying that they're not using American cannabis for that research.
Right? We have better cannabis anyway.
Absolutely. But outside of that, no imports. And again, States Act is simply defers to state law. So as far as international borders and boundaries go, that would have to come in. We'd have to address that next.
Chris Conrad here. Thanks. Great panel. I'm really hoping the feds do something this year with you guys. But I'm just wondering, on the other side of the equation, it seems to me like we've got the court system. And historically, we've had a mixed bag. I mean, like obviously the OCBC, they said they couldn't, you don't have a necessity defense for distribution of marijuana. Then we had Raich decisions saying that the feds could raid you in your home for medical marijuana, even if you're a state licensed patient. But more recently, we've had things like the San Diego decision that said that they couldn't use federal law to overturn California's marijuana laws, and they also had the Oklahoma versus Colorado decision. So they said that they couldn't force Colorado to recriminalize because of its effects on other states. So I'm just wondering about what's going on the pike right now. Are there some cases we should be watching? Do you see any kind of cases that people might be thinking of a filing in terms of if you want to try to use the court system? I know that was very effective for the gay rights movement, but we haven't really had the same kind of relationship with the courts as them. And thank you again.
I guess this is me again. We'd ask some questions for some of the lobbyists too while they're here. The most concerning, Chris, the most concerning recent cases are some of the tax cases that are all coming in the government's favor for 280E. The Harborside case, I think, was very concerning. They ruled, the tax years that they ruled on for that case weren't their most profitable years. So it was, that ruling was 5 or 6 years, the period was 5 or 6 years ago, and they ruled that they absolutely had to pay 280E that wasn't paid. And then there was a secondary ruling that there was a little bit of a victory lap taken about it, which was confusing to me because the judge kind of had mercy on them and said, we're not going to apply the 20% penalty kicker, but they still lost the case. And it's going, I mean, I don't know what the exact tax burden is, but back of the envelope math looks like that could be a 9-figure tax bill. So that's bad. There was another case that showed that management, the management company structures, that the IRS could pierce that veil and could apply 280E taxation even if you're a management holding company, because you are part of the conspiracy and then therefore you are touching the plan. So those are incredibly concerning court rulings that are coming down. Congress must act. We have to fix this conflict. This has to go away. 280E will crush this industry sooner rather than later if we can't make this go away. So that's the urgency that I see. Some of the RICO cases are concerning, but that initially went our way, but in Colorado, but that's getting appealed up. So overall, I would say, look, the federal government's never brought a preemption case, and probably the reason they haven't done that is because they feel that they would lose. And this all goes back to Congress needs to act. The courts are frustrated from what we're seeing and what we're hearing from some folks from the bench. They're frustrated and saying that we need direction here. We need, these are people who are not violating the law, who are abiding by a regulated system, that are paying their taxes, but they're violating federal law. You guys need to figure this out. And so I'm concerned about the tax stuff that's coming in the courts right now.
The ideology of those being appointed to the bench versus those who are being elected to Congress is significantly different. If you watch those who are being appointed to the bench right now in the federal circuit, they're people in their mid-40s, mid-50s, grew up in the era of just say no, very heavily law enforcement. Their worldview is in a place that is much different than both Republicans and Democrats in Congress. You're getting younger members, those who are directly influenced by what's going on in their states, and there isn't that same level of influence that happens in the judiciary. It's an independent judiciary. So in addition to the conflict and the technical challenges, I think if you look at who's getting appointed, they're very, very law and order types who come from that. And I'm 47. I mean, I remember that whole era too. So just Congress is a better place for us to fight these battles.
Well, let me add one more thing on the judicial front too, right? Everyone knew where Attorney General Jeff Sessions was on this issue, and it was never going to be helpful to the industry. We're about to get a new AG, Bill Barr, who went through his confirmation hearings a couple weeks ago and said, I know that businesses in states relied upon the Cole memo, and then the government pulled that away, and that's unfair, and I'm not going to enforce against them, which was a huge moment, right? I mean, knowing that the new AG wasn't going to come in and completely upend everything that you as business owners and consumers had relied upon. So he's going through his meetings by meetings with individual senators on the Hill, and we're hearing consistently that what he said publicly is what he's committing to them privately, particularly Cory Gardner, who he met with on Tuesday, or on Wednesday. So there's a lot in terms of momentum here, where at least we know the next Attorney General is not going to be another Jeff Sessions.
And speaking of Senator Gardner for 1 second, Senator Gardner felt that AG Sessions lied to him and then went out on the floor of the U.S. Congress and put a hold on every DOJ appointment until he cut a deal with the president for us. Who has ever done anything like that for us? It was a seismic moment.
Yeah, I just want to kind of reiterate Neil's point. If you're in the industry, you definitely need to pay attention to the RICO cases, the tax cases. Also, as activists, I think there's something you can do in some of these RICO cases is to pay attention as to who is filing them. In Oregon, like a winery filed a civil RICO case, and the winery then got bad publicity, and activists kind of say, hey, we're going to boycott your wine if you if you continue with this suit. And in Oregon, industry estimates are that 41% of Oregonians use cannabis within the last month. So that's a big market. So I think activists have a role to step up in some of these state RICO cases sometimes. And with the Race Supreme Court case where the feds could still enforce federal law when a legal patient is growing cannabis in their own backyard, not giving it to anybody else. Unlike the gay rights movement, I think there's a lot of parallels between the gay rights movement and the cannabis movement. Unlike that, we're not going to have the courts save us. And so politically is where we have we have to make the change because the courts aren't going to do it. We need to change the law in Congress.
All right, thank you. We're almost out of time. We got time for maybe one more. Is it quick?
Four more minutes. I got word.
Quick question. Here in California, we tried to lower our cannabis taxes. It didn't work out because the revenue was going to go down. States and governments seem to be against lowering sin taxes. 280E seems like one of the largest sin taxes that's ever existed. With the States Act passing, hopefully, do we see revenue for cannabis businesses going to the federal government going down, or are they going to figure out some other way to get their money out of us?
When the Congress passed 280E in 1982, they never envisioned an industry like ours. That was, its technical letter of the law is correct, but it is being misapplied to us, and it's done on purpose. So the States Act fixes 280E. 280E penalty would no longer apply to cannabis businesses who are abiding by state law. The federal government will then respond with trying to come at us with an excise tax, and that's also part of the reason why we built such a great team. So how wonderful would it be as an industry that we actually get to pivot from asking to be treated fairly and like every other business and every other industry in the country to actually advocating to not tax us out of existence, which is a tough position to take right now while we're asking them to, not seize all of our assets and not take all of our profit through a provision in a tax code that was meant to take all the profit out of illegal businesses. And 280E works as constructed. It works very well. It takes all the profit out of your business, but it shouldn't be applied for us, and States Act would fix it.
Great. Good morning. Thanks for a great discussion. Just want to come back to the import-export discussion quickly. Under the States Act, where do you see things coming next in terms of the ability to export out of California or other jurisdictions into other global markets? And secondly, back to the comment on import, saw this morning a press release from a Colombian company that was just approved to export into Canada legally for the first time this morning. Again, do you see that kind of coming forward into the U.S. market?
Eventually, yes. The States Act just would end the conflict between federal and state law, so it wouldn't open up international borders. But again, going back to my example with Vermont, passing that first seismic change that actually changes the law and ends the conflict is way harder than amending the law once it's on the books as we're figuring out how to do this. So, of course, once the Congress says, okay, this is a legitimate industry and all these businesses are not in violation of the law, then our full expectation is Congress is going to move, and they're going to move to set up regulation, and they're going to end prohibition, and that's going to open up all imports, all exports, international markets, but probably not in this Congress.
Yeah, in Oregon, there has been legislation introduced that would allow the governor of Oregon to introduce into agreements with other states to export cannabis. So I think once the States Act gets passed, then the pressure, kind of how we've legalized state by state, we do the same thing with exports. And you move state by state and get states to agree to export with each other, and then we get some action in Congress as well in the next legislative action.
Sounds good to me. I look forward to smoking Oregon weed without having to make a 6-hour drive. Right? They got good weed in Oregon. I'm lying. Colorado will probably be in trouble. Let's hear it again for our entire panel.